The sun rose over the bustling African city, painting the streets gold with light and noise. Hawkers shouted over each other, selling roasted corn, fresh fruit, and cheap shoes. Children darted between market stalls, their laughter mixing with the blare of distant car horns. It was a city alive with movement, where no one ever stopped long enough to notice the quiet souls in the corners. In the middle of it all worked Tunde, a young construction worker in his late 20s. His hands were calloused, his clothes worn, and his smile, small but genuine, carried the kind of peace that came from gratitude. Every morning before the day's labor began, he bought a modest lunch of rice and stew from a roadside vendor. The same metal container, slightly dented but clean, always accompanied him. When noon arrived, while others crowded under shade to gossip or play cards, Tunde sat alone beneath the same old mango tree near the construction site. The tree was his quiet refuge, a small piece of calm in the city's constant roar. He wasn't rich, not even close. His shoes were patched, his wages barely covered rent and food, but he was content. He often said to himself, "Peace is better than plenty." His co-workers teased him for it, nicknaming him Mr. Charity. "Ah, Tunde. Always sharing what you barely have," one of them joked. Tunde just laughed, unbothered. Sometimes he shared his food with stray kids who wandered by, their eyes wide with hunger. It wasn't much, but it was something, and to him, something was enough. That morning, however, the rhythm of the day changed. As the workers mixed cement and lifted bricks, a frail woman appeared near the edge of the site. Her clothes hung in tatters, her hair tangled with dust. She moved slowly as though each step cost her strength. Most people turned away, some muttering, others pretending not to see her at all, but Tunde noticed. He always noticed. At lunchtime he sat beneath his mango tree again, the familiar aroma of rice and stew filling the air. As he opened the container, his eyes caught sight of the woman sitting by the wall, trembling, her empty hands clasped together as though in prayer. He hesitated. His stomach growled, reminding him how long the morning had been. But then the woman swayed slightly, and something deep within him, a quiet voice, said, "Go." Without thinking twice, Tunde stood, walked over, and held out his meal. "Here. Mama, please eat." She blinked, startled. Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. Then, with shaking fingers, she accepted the food. Tears welled in her clouded eyes as she began to eat slowly, carefully, like someone who hadn't tasted kindness in years. Behind him, laughter erupted. "Tunde." "You'll starve today," one of the workers shouted. He turned and smiled faintly. "Maybe she needs it more than I do." The woman paused between bites and looked up at him. Her voice was weak, barely more than a whisper. "Blessings. We'll find you," she murmured. Tunde didn't understand the words, but something about the way she said them, gentle, almost sacred, made him pause. He nodded politely, smiled again, and walked back to work. The city's chaos swallowed the moment whole, the hammering, shouting, and roaring traffic continuing as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But that single act of kindness, unseen and uncelebrated, had already set something powerful in motion. And long after the noise faded, the woman's whisper lingered in the air. "Blessings will find you." That night, Tunde walked home slowly, his stomach empty, but his heart strangely full. The city's usual chaos, the honking cars, the chatter of vendors closing their stalls, seemed softer somehow, like the world itself had grown gentle for a moment. When he reached home, his mother was sitting outside their small one-room house, peeling cassava in a bowl. Her hands were rough from years of market work, but her eyes were kind, the same warm brown as his. "You're late, Tunde," she said, looking up. "And you haven't eaten, have you?" He shrugged, lowering himself onto the stool beside her. "I gave my food to someone who needed it more." His mother's hands paused. "Again?" she asked, half in concern, half in disbelief. He smiled faintly. She was old, lost maybe, but something in her eyes. He stopped, unsure how to explain it. His mother chuckled softly. "You and that heart of yours. Sometimes kindness brings blessings, sometimes trouble, but I suppose we never know which until the story ends." Tunde leaned back against the wall, staring into the dark. "Maybe," he murmured. "But today I met someone who reminded me why kindness matters. That night, sleep came easily. the kind that wraps around a tired soul like a soft blanket. The next morning began like any other, dust rising from the street, sweat already forming before sunrise, and the clang of tools at the construction site. But as Tunde lifted a heavy block onto his shoulder, something made him glance toward the road. There she was again, the beggar woman. She stood a little distance away, not begging this time. Her clothes were still torn, but her eyes looked clearer, more present. She simply watched him, calm, almost proud. Tunde hesitated, unsure whether to approach her. When he finally gathered courage, he walked over, carrying a bottle of water. "You came back," he said gently. The woman smiled faintly, her lips dry and cracked. "The world never forgets kindness, my son." She took the bottle, drank a little, and handed it back with trembling fingers. Before he could say another word, she turned and walked away, her steps slow but steady, until the crowd swallowed her whole. He stood there for a long time, staring after her, feeling a strange chill creep up his spine. Days passed, and the routine of life continued, but something felt off, as if a quiet shadow followed him. Then one morning, the foreman called everyone together. The man's tone was grim. "Listen up," he shouted over the noise of machinery. "The company is cutting costs. Half of you will be laid off by the end of the week." A silence fell over the workers. When the list was read aloud, Tunde's name was among those being dismissed. His stomach sank. He tried to smile, but his lips trembled. Some of the workers clapped him on the shoulder, pity in their eyes. Others whispered things not meant for his ears. "That's what happens when you're too soft." One of them muttered, "Always giving, never saving." Tunde didn't respond. He just packed his tools quietly and walked away. By the time he reached his mango tree, the sky had already begun to darken. He sat there, staring at the empty lunch container he hadn't even filled that morning. His mind swirled with questions, about fate, about kindness, about whether he'd done something wrong. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly defeated. As the wind rustled the leaves above him, he noticed something odd, a folded piece of paper tucked into the wooden bench. Curious, he unfolded it. The paper was old and slightly crumpled, but the handwriting was neat and deliberate. "When you lose something, give and watch what returns." There was no name, no clue who had written it. Tunde looked around. The construction site was empty now, the workers long gone. The street was quiet except for a few distant voices. Then, faintly, he thought he saw a familiar figure. A woman in tattered clothes standing by the far corner of the road. She seemed to be watching him again. He blinked, and she was gone. That night, Tunde couldn't sleep. He lay awake, the words on that paper echoing in his mind. "When you lose something, give." He had just lost his job. What else did he have left to give? His pockets were almost empty, and yet he remembered his mother's voice from years ago. Even when your hands are empty, your heart can still be full. The thought brought a faint smile to his face. He didn't know who the beggar woman really was, just that her presence seemed to follow moments of loss and kindness, like a shadow reminding him of something greater than circumstance. He tucked the paper into his shirt pocket and whispered into the darkness, "Maybe. Maybe this is not the end." Outside, the city breathed, restless and alive, while under the same mango tree, a faint glimmer of moonlight touched the worn-out bench where the message had been left. Somewhere unseen, the beggar woman's voice echoed softly, carried by the night wind. "The world never forgets kindness, my son." And though Tunde could not hear it, something in his heart stirred, the first spark of a journey that would change his life forever. Days turned into weeks. The rhythm of Tunde's life began to unravel, slowly, painfully, quietly. The first few days after losing his job, he had been hopeful. "It's just a setback," he told himself. "Another site will hire me soon." But as days stretched into weeks, and weeks into months, the truth pressed harder. Work was scarce, and luck was a stranger. Each morning he rose before sunrise, just as before, walking through the city with his worn-out boots and hopeful eyes. He knocked on doors, asked foremen, begged for a chance, even half-pay, even part-time. But most shook their heads. "Sorry, brother, times are hard for everyone." By the second month, his savings had dwindled to nothing. His mother's small earnings from the market barely kept them fed. He stopped buying lunch altogether. Still, he refused to give up. He carried bricks for a few coins. He swept dusty roads under the harsh afternoon sun. He polished car windows when no one else would. But every night when he returned home, the question haunted him. Was kindness worth this? Sometimes he would sit under the same mango tree where he had once shared his lunch with the beggar woman, wondering if she had survived, or if she had ever thought of him again. He didn't know that life was quietly weaving their paths together once more. Tunde got a day's job cleaning the entrance of a tall glass building in the heart of the city. The place gleamed like a palace, marble floors, fountains that whispered instead of splashing, guards in pressed uniforms. He felt small and out of place, pushing his broom across the shining tiles while people in suits brushed past him as if he were invisible. Then a commotion began at the street corner. A black luxury car rolled up, sleek, polished, the kind Tunde had only ever seen in magazines. Reporters surged forward. Cameras clicked and flashed like 1,000 tiny lightning bolts. From the car stepped a woman dressed in elegant traditional attire, a flowing gown of royal blue, golden jewelry glimmering under the sun. She moved, with calm confidence, the kind that made people part in silence to let her pass. The reporters shouted her name, Madame Kemi. Madame Kemi. Tunde paused, his broom in midair. The name sounded familiar. He had heard it whispered on the radio. Kemi Adewale, a philanthropist who ran one of the biggest foundations in the country. Her organization built schools, fed the poor, and offered scholarships to underprivileged children. He stood frozen, watching her. Something in her face stirred a strange recognition. It wasn't just beauty. It was something deeper, something gentle and kind that tugged at his memory. Then, suddenly, her eyes turned toward him. It was only a moment, a passing glance through the crowd, but her gaze locked onto his. Her smile faltered, her steps slowed. Tunde's hands trembled. The broom slipped and clattered against the tiles. The woman blinked, then turned away as her assistants ushered her toward the press line. The moment was gone. The world continued, cameras flashing, microphones waving, as if nothing had happened. But for Tunde, everything had changed. That evening, after the crowd had dispersed and the reporters had left, Tunde stayed behind to help clean the event hall. He worked quietly, sweeping confetti and discarded papers, humming to himself to fight off his exhaustion. The echo of laughter from earlier lingered faintly in the empty hall. When he finally looked up, he froze. She was there. The same woman, Madame Kemi, stood near the doorway, alone, her elegant shawl draped lightly over one shoulder. She was watching him with a curious expression. He straightened up quickly, startled. "Good evening, Ma," he said, lowering his gaze respectfully. Her voice was calm, but gentle. "You don't recognize me, do you?" Tunde frowned, unsure how to respond. "No, Ma. I'm sorry if we've met before." A smile touched her lips. "Oh, we have. Once, long ago. You gave your lunch to a woman by the roadside." He blinked, confused. "What?" Her eyes softened. "That woman was me." For a long moment, silence filled the space between them, heavy, unreal, impossible. Tunde's lips parted, but no words came out. She stepped closer, her voice lowering to a near whisper. "I was lost then, not just hungry, but broken. I had lost my husband, my home, my mind." She looked down, her fingers trembling slightly. "People passed me like I was air. No one saw me, until you." Tunde felt the ground tilt beneath him. He remembered the frail woman with torn clothes, the trembling hands clutching food, the faint whisper he couldn't understand. "You. That was you," he breathed. She nodded, her eyes glistening. "You gave me food when I had nothing, but more than that, you gave me hope. That small act reminded me I was still human." Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment she looked like that same woman again. Not a rich philanthropist, but a soul who had once been forgotten by the world. "I found my way to a shelter that night," she continued. "I got help. Slowly, I rebuilt my life. I started working again. And when I could, I began a foundation to help others who were where I once was." Tunde stood motionless, emotion choking his throat. "Madam," I didn't do anything special. It was just a meal." She smiled, the same faint, humble smile that once flickered through her hunger. "There's no such thing as just kindness. Sometimes one meal can feed a soul that was starving for hope." He swallowed hard, his eyes lowering. "I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," she said gently. "Just listen." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small brown envelope. "You gave when you had little," she said softly, placing it in his hands. "Now, let me give when I have much." Tunde hesitated, shaking his head. "No, Ma, I can't." But she closed his fingers around the envelope. "This is not charity, Tunde. This is gratitude." He looked down, the weight of her words heavier than the envelope itself. When he finally opened it, he gasped. Inside was a job offer. Full-time employment with her foundation. The salary was more than he had ever dreamed of earning. Tears burned behind his eyes. "Why me?" he asked. "There are so many who deserve this more." She smiled knowingly. "Because when the world turned away, you didn't. And men like you are the ones who keep humanity alive." For a long while they stood in silence, the night air thick with emotion. Finally she said softly, "That day by the roadside, I told you something you couldn't hear. Do you remember?" He nodded faintly. "You whispered something, but I didn't understand it." Her eyes gleamed in the dim light. "I said, the world never forgets kindness." Tunde's heart pounded. The words from the note under the mango tree flashed in his memory. "When you lose something, give, and watch what returns." He looked at her, realization dawning. "It was you. You left the message." She smiled gently. "Some debts of the heart can only be repaid through destiny." Then she turned to leave, her shawl fluttering softly in the breeze. But before stepping into her car, she looked back one last time and said, "Tunde, this is only the beginning. What you gave once has now come full circle." As the car disappeared into the city night, Tunde stood still under the fading glow of the streetlights, humbled, overwhelmed, transformed. He clutched the envelope to his chest and whispered, "The world never forgets kindness." And for the first time in months, he smiled, a quiet, grateful smile that carried the warmth of a miracle. Fade out on Tunde standing under the mango tree, the wind rustling softly through its leaves. The same tree where kindness first took root. 2 days later, as the morning sun spilled over the crowded rooftops of Lagos, Tunde's phone began to buzz uncontrollably. Unknown number. He hesitated before answering. "Hello?" A woman's crisp, professional voice came through. "Good morning, Mr. Tunde. Madam Adeswa Bako would like to see you at the Hope Hands Foundation headquarters today, if you're available." Tunde's breath caught. "Madam Adeswa?" "Yes, sir. 10 o'clock sharp." She said, "It's important." He could barely speak. Yes, I'll be there." The call ended, but Tunde stood frozen in his small one-room home. His mother looked up from her cooking pot, concern in her eyes. "Who was that?" "Someone from the foundation," he whispered. "They want to see me." She smiled faintly. "Then go, my son. You've always given with a clean heart. Maybe today, God gives back." He spent half an hour choosing what to wear. He had only 2 shirts, one faded blue, one white. The white was slightly wrinkled but clean. He ironed it carefully with the old charcoal iron, polished his shoes until he could see a dim reflection, and prayed quietly before leaving. By the time he reached the foundation's office, the city was awake. Traffic blaring, horns echoing, hawkers calling out their goods. But as he stepped into the towering glass building, the world changed. Everything gleamed. Receptionists smiled. Cameras flashed. Reporters. Dozens of them. Tunde froze by the doorway, clutching his worn cap in both hands. A journalist turned, recognizing him. "That's him! That's the man!" Instantly, microphones and cameras swarmed around him. Voices overlapped. "Sir, how do you feel knowing you inspired Madame Adesua? Did you ever imagine this day would come? What's the first thing you'll do with your new position?" he stammered, overwhelmed, eyes darting across the sea of flashing lights, until a familiar voice rose above the noise. "Let him breathe. The crowd parted. Madame Adesua Bako walked toward him, elegant yet warm, her smile steady and maternal. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Welcome, Tunde." "Ma," he managed, lowering his head respectfully. "Come," she said softly. "Today is your day." The conference hall was filled. Journalists, photographers, television crews, and members of the foundation staff. A large banner behind the podium read, "The Kindness Initiative, Changing Lives Through Compassion." Adesua led Tunde to the front, where 2 chairs were waiting. She addressed the audience, her voice calm and commanding. "2 years ago," she began, "I was a woman without hope. I had lost everything, my family, my home, and my will to live. On a dusty roadside, I met a stranger, a construction worker who gave away his lunch to a beggar." The hall fell silent. "That act of kindness fed more than my stomach," she continued. "It awakened something I thought had died, faith in humanity." That meal became the seed from which the Hope Hands Foundation grew. She turned toward Tunde, her eyes glistening. "And today, I'm proud to announce that this man, Tunde Afolayan, will serve as our first ever ambassador for the Kindness Initiative, a project dedicated to spreading compassion through action." The crowd erupted in applause. Flashbulbs exploded like fireworks. Tunde sat stiffly, unsure whether to smile or cry. He'd never seen so many people look at him before, not with mockery, not with pity, but with admiration. Adesua continued, "Our new campaign will build food shelters, sponsor free school meals, and create kindness corners across the nation. Spaces where anyone can give, take, and share freely. No questions asked." All this because one man decided not to walk away. The applause grew louder. Some journalists stood to clap. Others wiped tears from their eyes. In marketplaces, strangers spoke his name. Taxi drivers argued proudly about which part of the city he came from. Street vendors replayed the interview on small portable TVs. Somewhere, a little boy asked his mother, "Mama, can we be kind too?" A few days later, Tunde was invited to appear on a live television interview. He arrived early, his palms sweating, wearing a borrowed blazer that was slightly too big. The studio lights were blinding. The host smiled warmly. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we bring you the man whose single act of kindness changed countless lives, Mr. Tunde Afolayan." The audience applauded. The host leaned forward. "Tunde, tell us, what made you give your lunch to a complete stranger that day?" He paused, took a deep breath, and spoke softly. "Because hunger doesn't ask how rich you are. It only asks if you have something to share." The studio went silent for a moment. Then applause thundered through the room. Some of the cameramen were visibly moved. The host smiled. "Wise words from a humble heart." Tunde added, "I didn't do it for attention. I just saw someone in need. I didn't know that small act would come back like this. But maybe that's what kindness does. It travels far, even when you don't." After the interview, as he left the studio, people stopped him on the street. A woman with a baby whispered, "God bless you, my son." A taxi driver leaned out of his window to shout, "Tunde for president." He laughed shyly, still not used to the noise of fame, but inside his heart was light. Not because the world finally saw him, but because it saw the power of simple kindness. That night, he visited his mother. She was sitting outside, surrounded by neighbors watching the evening news on a small TV. When his face appeared on screen, the crowd cheered. His mother smiled quietly, tears shining in her eyes. "You see, my son, I told you, the hand that gives never stays empty." Tunde knelt beside her, holding her wrinkled hands. "Mama, I didn't do much," she chuckled softly. "You did enough. And now, the world is learning what enough can do." Later that night, alone in his small room, Tunde looked out the window toward the stars. The same city lights blinked in the distance, the same noise, the same hum of life. But tonight felt different. He wasn't rich. He wasn't famous in the way people dream of, but he had something better. Meaning. He whispered the words that had followed him since that first day. "The world never forgets kindness." And as the night breeze rustled through the mango leaves outside, Tunde smiled, knowing his story had become part of something much larger than himself. The days that followed turned into a new rhythm of life for Tunde. Not one of wealth or luxury, but of purpose. Every morning he still woke before dawn. He still took the crowded bus, still walked the dusty roads lined with vendors shouting for attention. But now, wherever he went, people greeted him with warmth. "Brother Tunde," a fruit seller would call. "You're the man who gave away your lunch." He'd smile shyly, wave, and keep walking. But what truly changed was not how others saw him. It was how he saw the world. With the support of the Hope Hands Foundation, Tunde began working on small community projects across the city. He didn't wear suits or sit behind an office desk. Instead, he preferred to be in the field, sleeves rolled up, shoes dusty, helping children carry boxes of rice, or mixing cement to build new feeding centers. He believed that kindness wasn't something you signed on paper. It was something you did with your hands. His first major project was near his old worksite, a small open space under the shade of a mango tree. That same tree where he once ate his lunch in silence now became the heart of a new program. The Street Kids Lunch Hub. Every afternoon, dozens of children gathered there for free meals. Some were barefoot, some carried school books given by the foundation. Tunde made sure to sit with them, sharing stories and laughter instead of speeches. He never mentioned the cameras or the fame. He didn't want to be known as the man who changed lives. He just wanted to remind people that compassion was simple. One afternoon, a little boy tugged at his sleeve. "Uncle Tunde, is it true you gave your food to a stranger?" Tunde smiled. "Yes, it's true." The boy frowned thoughtfully. "Weren't you hungry?" He chuckled softly. "I was. But sometimes, helping someone else fills you up in ways food can't." The boy nodded, though he clearly didn't understand fully. Yet the moment planted a seed, just as one small meal had planted something greater years ago. At home, Tunde's mother watched him proudly. The neighborhood treated her like royalty now. Neighbors brought her gifts, fresh vegetables, bread, fruit, saying, "Mama Tunde, we're just returning what your son gave the world." She'd laugh and shake her head. "He gave one meal," she said, smiling, "and God multiplied it into 1,000. But when she was alone, she often prayed in silence. 'Thank you, Lord, for showing my son that giving is the richest kind of living.'" Despite the growing attention, Tunde remained grounded. He refused expensive cars or luxury houses that sponsors offered. "I'm not chasing comfort," he told them. "I'm chasing change." And sometimes, when the noise of the city became too loud, he returned to where it all began, the same old mango tree by the roadside. He'd sit on the familiar bench, close his eyes, and let the breeze brush against his face. He could still remember that day so clearly. The laughter of his co-workers, the hunger in his stomach, the trembling hands of the beggar woman. He could still hear her whisper, "The world never forgets kindness, my son." He smiled every time he thought of her, not because of the fame she brought him, but because her life became proof that kindness truly could resurrect what was lost. One evening, after a long day visiting a new feeding center, Tunde passed by the mango tree again. The sky was painted gold with sunset. Children's laughter echoed in the distance, mixing with the faint hum of traffic. He sat down, just for a moment, to rest. That's when he noticed it. A small, folded piece of paper tucked under the edge of the bench. The paper looked old, fragile, as if it had been waiting there for him. His heart quickened. He picked it up gently and unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, but unmistakable. The same hand that had once left him a message when he lost his job years ago. The note read, "Kindness never dies. It only grows roots in new hearts." Tunde stared at the words for a long time, feeling the lump rise in his throat. He looked around, the market stalls, the street, the familiar faces. But there was no sign of anyone watching him. He smiled faintly, folded the letter carefully, and slipped it into his pocket, close to his heart. He whispered, "Thank you, wherever you are." That night, he returned home and placed the letter beside the framed photograph of him and Madame Adishwa at the foundation event. For him, it wasn't a trophy or a souvenir. It was a reminder of the beginning. He sat by the window as the city lights flickered like stars. Outside, laughter echoed, vendors packed their stalls, and music floated through the humid air. Life continued, busy, loud, unpredictable. But for Tunde, everything was still. He whispered softly, "One small kindness can outlive us all." And as the scene slowly fades, the camera pans out, past the mango tree, past the streets filled with movement and color, past the city skyline glowing beneath a violet dusk. Children's laughter drifts faintly through the air, carried by the wind. A single folded note remains on the bench, fluttering lightly. Kindness doesn't ask for witnesses. It only asks for hearts willing to keep it alive. The screen fades to black. The final sound. The echo of distant drums. Soft, steady, like the heartbeat of a world remembering one man's small, extraordinary gift. Soft African drums play beneath a gentle melody of flutes and strings. The camera glides over the busy city. Vendors calling out, children laughing, the hum of traffic blending with the rhythm of life. In a world where many walk past the hungry and the forgotten, one small act can become a seed of change. Tundi didn't know the world was watching, but heaven was. We see Tundi and Madame Adesua standing side by side in front of a newly built school painted bright yellow and white. The sign above the gate reads, "The Hope Hands Learning Center, for every child who still believes." Children in clean uniforms rush past them, their laughter filling the air. Some carry new books, others wave at Tunde and shout, "Uncle Tunde!" He kneels down to tie a boy's loose shoelace, smiling with quiet warmth, the same kindness that began his journey. Adesua watches him with pride and says softly, "You gave me hope once, Tunde. Now look, it's multiplying." He smiles humbly, replying, "It was never mine alone. It belonged to all of us." Villagers building new feeding centers, volunteers distributing food, and children planting small trees around the schoolyard. The world doesn't change through wealth or fame. It changes through the gentle hands of those who choose compassion even when no one is looking. As they turn toward the new school filled with laughter, the screen slowly fades to white. Kindness costs nothing, but its reward lasts forever. If this story touched your heart, share it, because one small act of kindness can change someone's tomorrow.